Our next speaker is Melissa Leung. She is with GECA Environmental in Canada.
Thank you guys for your patience. The PowerPoint didn't reach the email on time. My fault. I take the blame for that. It's been a little chaotic. So I'm very happy that Ryan went through all of this. Not a financing expert. You guys can absolutely talk to Grain on that subject. Today, I'm mostly here to talk about de-risking the investments. It's one thing to find capital. It's one thing. Oh, what did I do? It's another thing to actually get the capital to buy into your project, right? You can have all the asks that you want. You need to de-risk it for them. I also like to move generally when I talk, so maybe I'll go down and go around. So, in general, I want to introduce briefly GECA. Know a few faces in the room, but there are a few that we actually don't know. So want to go over that. The second piece is a very quick overview. I don't think we have to go too far into it because we want to spend most of the time talking about risks in biochar, especially risks in biochar and also how it touches into carbon because these projects are so intertwined, right? And then want to talk about the sector needs as well. We saw the types of capital earlier. What do we see with the projects that we work with are the largest needs? So, what we do, very briefly. We act on 4 axes for impact. We work on development of projects, okay? Development of frameworks, for example. We work on de-risking, de-risking projects, but also de-risking investments. So we work with both project developers and in some cases with financiers as well. We also work on strategy, how to build the best project that you can build. How can you optimize something with what you have, what you know, the people around you, and building pipelines also for these projects. And then we work in the ecosystem a lot. We share, we do webinars, we like to take a lot of time for education, for the community, right? Ecosystem is, again, there on the slides because it's a very important piece of getting all together and getting this space lifted up. It's still the beginning. I've only been in biochar for like 5 years, which makes me basically ancient in the space almost, but we're really seeing it blow off and kick up, so yeah. Very quickly, we're experts in thermochemical processing and the carbon that comes out of these types of facilities. So we're from all over the world. We're a small team, but very mighty. Diversity is very strong with us. We're about 15 or 16, and I think we cover over 10 languages between the team. These are some of the clients that we've worked at in the past, I would say, for 3-4 years. It's very diverse. As I mentioned, we work with project developers, we work with existing corporates, we work in metallurgy, we work with carbon buyers as well. And finally, our expertise. So we saw the angles in which we attack the problems, but our core expertise are technology and processes. So finding the right equipment, finding the right machines, putting together the right processes, products and market. How do we develop something that makes sense for an end use, right? What actually makes sense for an end use? Strategy, so thinking about, again, optimization and all of the challenges and that can come up. How do we avoid them? How do we prepare to get there? Because some of them are inevitable. And then finally, we also do carbon project development and monetization. So we are carbon project developers for biochar producers, and we also commercialize these credits. All right, so very quickly, we're seeing larger projects come on. A few years ago when we were here, we were talking about projects that were happening that were maybe 100 tons, something that's more on a farm. We're talking about projects that are 1,000 tons, 2,000 tons. Those are huge projects. Today, we're working with some project developers who are looking to make over 100,000 tons a year of biochar. And these, they will be happening. They're from everywhere. Obviously, this is the USBI. We're going to focus a little bit more on the US, but we're seeing more interest also in Latin America, in Africa a lot, and in in Asia in general too. We're seeing variations from projects between $1 million for smaller projects, lower capital intensive projects with certain types of technologies, to large projects, 150 million, size projects where other types of capital can get unlocked at that pace. And we also see that financing is always a major barrier. So in our position as experts, as carbon project developers, we want to help de-risk to bring in more financing. We want projects to work out so that more financing will come in. So, this is the wheel of risks in biochar and CDR. CDR is there. If you don't want to make carbon, that's fine, but it's all very intertwined, okay? There's a lot of them. There's a lot of links between them, and I just want to talk about a few of these. So what are some risks that actually interact with each other? Some risks that we have to prepare for under project development or during the actual project operations, so that financing can be unlocked quicker and in better terms. It's one thing to find financing, it's another thing to find good financing, all right? So, the first one is the interaction between OEMs and construction and commissioning. One of the risks that is really underestimated is delays due to commissioning. Technology manufacturers, OEM, a lot of them are extremely good at what they do. You know, we work with many of them. We have a watch with more than 200 of them. More experienced, some of them, others less. But one thing we continuously see from project developers is an underestimation of commissioning timelines, and that leads to major delay, and everyone knows time is money. So this is extremely important. Now, how do we de-risk this? For investors, they want to have a certainty that what you're putting forward to them in terms of timeline is true. So there has to be some buffers taken into consideration. What if the Panama Canal just jams up? We've seen that happen before, right? These are things that obviously we don't plan for it, but we have to think about when we're working on putting together a financing package. The other thing is that for carbon financiers in particular, people that are most interested in CDR, and even any financier, the timeline to that capital, monetization I should say, is so important. We've seen most projects, actually very few projects in biochar, not to be grim or anything, have hit their targets of timelines because always underestimated. We've seen projects delayed by 18 months. Right? We've seen the projects delayed by less, some by more, sometimes due to a screw breaking. Something dumb like that. And sorry for the words I used, I shouldn't use these words. So how can we de-risk them? For investors generally, but also for project developers, make sure that those timelines are double checked, that they're challenged, that they are not necessarily too conservative, that's not what we want to do, but that we know that they're realistic, right? The second piece on the risk that I want to talk about is how supply and feedstock influences operations. So a lot of people talk about wood. There's all types of feedstocks, right? Wood, ag waste, it can be as complicated as empty fruit bunches from palm oil. It can be more simple, like nutshells. We have seen project delays, and we've seen high risk, and sometimes even almost projects failing because of not knowing the feedstock well enough. Too much dust in your feedstock, your machine may not be well equipped to handle that. That is dangerous because, again, delays cost a lot. And the other piece we've seen in some instances is that the equipment is actually not adapted at all to the feedstock. So we've had some clients come to us before they became our client, and they said, I bought this $3 million machine, except it doesn't do what I want it to do because they didn't inspect the feedstock beforehand. It's something that can seem so simple, but it's so important, and it's really into the details of the operations that we find some of the issues and the delays. So we want to make sure that we know our feedstock extremely well, and that our technology also knows our feedstock, and that they're equipped to handle it, and that either they've run tests or they know the challenges that are coming. The other thing is, in terms of contracting for CDR, it's having feedstock supply that is signed, right, contracted, that wants to match the offtake. People come to us, so we develop biochar CDR projects, as we mentioned, and some people come to us and they want to have find a buyer that has a 8-year offtake on the carbon credits. Except they have, let's say, 4 years of contracted feedstock. You know, why would the buyer actually take that risk, right? Ryan mentioned it earlier, so did a great job. Don't just show up with a picture, right, of that feedstock. Have it on paper. And because feedstock prices fluctuate a lot, especially if you're in the wood sector, but also in any other sector like ag, where we're seeing more projects for hydrogen, for liquid biofuels, those prices vary. So having that is extremely important to align with all the offtakes, including biochar, including CDRs. Then, well, this is something that we all talk about, biochar offtakes, how they're linked to carbon offtakes. Buyers of credits that are doing that on a longer time frame, whether it's a type of streaming entity or even a specific end-use buyer, large corporate buyers, they want to make sure that your biochar is placed, that you have the ability to place your biochar. We see a lot of projects go through, and very excited about making biochar. I don't have to preach to the choir, but you know, if you use it in soils and nutrient retention, it's beautiful. If we use it in concrete, we can help displace, you know, X, Y, Z aggregates or sand, whatever the biochar specificities are. And why does so few project developers in biochar actually develop product? Or is everyone focusing on producing biochar? You should be also thinking about developing products. How do you use this biochar, right, for your end buyer? People are not educated into the biochar offtake, you know? So when we work with project developers, we want to make sure that they develop a product. It doesn't have to be a final product, but you actually, it works best when project developers give guidelines of how to use it, how much of it to use, right? A cement company, the cement sector is in high demand for biochar. Everyone's like, I'm going to sell into cement. It's going to be wonderful. We're going to make carbon negative concrete afterwards. But cement manufacturers, they want to know how to use your biochar. They don't just want to buy your biochar to replace sand. Some of them will do, right? Innovators, early adopters. But most of them, they want a recipe. They want to know the benefits. They want to know you've done testing. They want you to show proof. So that is a very key piece here. And it would also allow you to unlock those carbon offtakes and that carbon financing. And carbon offtake and financing. On the other side, if we step into the buyer's position, what we see is that in the CDR space in general, they're very keen on buying things like DAC. Large corporates, we know they make big announcements. A lot of people get frustrated in biochar because that biochar doesn't get the same, I guess, you know, advertisement. We've spoken to many buyers, obviously, in our day-to-day work, monetizing credits, and buyers are under the impression that there is so much biochar in the market. Why would they do long-term offtakes if there's so much biochar in the market? It's not true. There's no liquidity in credits, right? Because projects are unable to finance in big parts, or there are major delays. So if there are any buyers of CDR credits in the room, or people who think about doing financing for these projects, consider doing offtake of the credits on long-term periods for biochar. It's not as easy as it seems, and those buyers don't run around everywhere. So we really need carbon buyers to make long-term offtakes and put forward interest for biochar credits. They all love the story, but they don't necessarily want to make that piece, put it forward. So if as a community, us in biochar, we can get together and send a message and say, carbon buyers, offtake for long time periods, as a community, as an ecosystem, I think we can get somewhere. Get somewhere good. All right, investment needs. So Ryan, again, great presentation, talked about the type of capital, the sources, the usages for these projects. What I want to bring is a little bit of what we're seeing in terms of needs in the market. The clients that we work with, the project developers that we work with, what do they need? And maybe you'll find yourself, you know, thinking, not so much in my case. Some of you will say, absolutely. The biggest need in the space is development capital. There's very little development capital to build robust, de-risked project, to take the time to actually develop a product so you can attack those end markets and have those long-term commitments. Now, in some cases, you're your own consumer of biochar. Golden, beautiful. That's great if you have that outlook. But for other projects who are looking to make biochar as their core business, that's manufacturing, development capital is very scarce. So hopefully, I'm sure grain will be able to help with that. Yeah. We see debt and equity needs very closely related. It just goes hand in hand. We see a big need for it, especially, and this is not something that was mentioned earlier, this type of project scale, 1 to say 10 million, even 20 million, it's a niche in financing that has very little capital compared to projects that can develop to $100 million. So, I don't remember where I was going with this, but anyways, it's the case. The last piece I want to talk about is prepayments. A lot of projects are getting developed, and the developers count on prepayments from buyers of carbon credits, mostly. It is doable, but I want to send a message today. The expectations are misaligned with the reality, okay? It's not fast. It takes a lot of time. Unless you're willing to, enter the type of streaming agreement, which is probably the fastest, as laid out earlier. But if you're looking for a prepayment from an end buyer, it takes a lot of time. It will delay the project, and there's not $1 billion out there for this type of capital, not yet, okay? So the best way to move forward is move with small steps. If you can find that capital elsewhere, but continue to pursue those prepayments, it's the best scenario. And then in the next facility, from say a demo to a larger scale or to multiplying those facilities, you will be in a much better space to actually get this prepayment. Buyers often want proofs that you can deliver what you're going to be promising to deliver in carbon credits before writing you a check for $10 million. So, well, I put the grain logo. So this is my wheel with all the links. It's very pretty. You guys will have the slides, but it's just to put forward, I guess, the complexity of each of the risks and how they interact with each other. Obviously, there are missing lines. I only spoke about, I guess, 4 interactions today, but those were the ones that felt most important. I think that's it. That's it. So don't hesitate if you have questions. I don't know how much time I have left.
You got 5 more minutes.
I got 5 minutes. All yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa. That was very interesting.
Thank you.
Questions? In the back there?
It's a great question, and it probably comes from a sector that is much more mature than biochar. And I think we'll get there. I think also there are very few OEMs already that are providing performance guarantees. Not all of the OEMs are providing performance guarantees, only the ones that have a certain experience and a certain ability to actually answer that need. So I think it will come, but I think it's something that we have to see. It has to be there. How can one invest in a $20 million project without performance guarantees? In terms of penalties, I don't think we're at the level of construction. I think it'll get there. There's also the question of manufacturing. Manufacturing is done, I don't know a lot of huge manufacturing lines that pump out 1,000 systems per year. So we also have this, it's not, I won't say handmade, but there can be some small variabilities depending on the OEMs, of course, some of them big, some of them very little, and I think that can also cause an issue. So I don't know if I have, no. Yeah, I think the EPC it's a sensitive point. I can't call myself an expert on the subject. I just know that a lot of people who are building these plants have never built these plants before. This is where some systems are much, much, much more expensive than systems you can find on Alibaba. But, there's also a cost of not having those types of issues. Or price. So, I don't know if you were there yesterday, but Suzanne, our CEO, presented some, you were there? Okay, but for the ones that weren't there, Suzanne, our CEO, presented on different basically the economics of different project types, so across different feedstocks, geographies, scales, and technologies. We've seen, it's not that project fails once they're built. We see very little projects fail once they're built. It's more a matter as they don't get built because they don't get the financing, because everything has to be aligned, right? Well, I'm not teaching anyone anything, but you have to have all of the things close at all at the same time. We're seeing people who spend development capital more likely to have a faster project. The other piece is we tend also to see that the underestimation of the technical pieces, especially feedstock, as I mentioned earlier, and the technology itself is a big issue. People don't think they'll run into these issues because, you know, it's so easy to paralyze and you shove the feedstock in and you take it out, and we've been doing it for ages. I think people really underestimate some of the technical operational aspects of it. And it can cause a lot of issues in projects, a lot of problems. So surrounding yourself with the right people that have seen it, that have done it, is really probably a good way to mitigate that. And in terms of insurance, I think it's a good point also to hop on. We're seeing more insurances taking on that type of projects. And we're even also seeing, so for some of the projects we work on insurances on the carbon side. So there's, you know, the place is getting structured. Traditional service providers such as insurances are really starting to put out new products out there for these types of projects. We've also worked with GECA on the carbon side to develop their risk framework for biochar. They do insurance for biochar credits, offtakes. So we're seeing this ecosystem grow and mature. One thing is really important is we have to all be in the same boat and push it forward in the right direction. Pointing fingers and you know, I have the best biochar and this one is not the best because mine is, you know. We're of the, let's say, school of it's better to have a piece of a really big pie than the really big pie of nothing. So, I guess I can finish.
Melissa?
Biochar.org appreciates the support of our sponsors, exhibitors, presenters, and attendees. We look forward to seeing you at our next conference in September 2025.